Welcome back. Let's walk through the sample solutions now. And I've got a couple little extra factoids in here for fun. So I'm now in the O3 file, Idempotent Queries Solutions. And we've got the problems repeated in here. I have not reset my environment. So if I try to just create the non-clustered index in problem 1 with the original code, it will in fact fail because that index already exists, because I ran it back when I ran through the problem file. So the way I like to do this for checking if the index already exists is just to write a query that looks at sysindexes, sysobjects, and sysschemas, checks the index name against sysindexes, the table name against sysobjects, and the schema name against the schema table. Now there's a couple different ways you could do this. This is certainly not the only way to do it. What I'm doing is I'm counting, and I'm saying if the count is 0, then go ahead and create the index. And then just for demo purposes, I did put in an else statement to say if the count is not 0, we are just going to print out a message. I'm using raise error for that with a very low severity and level there. And I'm doing that with no weight. Now, one of the reasons I like to do this is it's not really going to be a problem in a script this short, but in scripting and batch processing I've done before, normal old print statements, they may not appear right away if you're running a long script. They may actually be buffered for quite a while. Raise error does have that nice option of saying, with no weight, it says, don't buffer this. Make this appear on the screen as soon as you actually hit this statement. So whenever I can, I do prefer personally using raise error for this type of messaging with low severity rather than using print for it. So let's go ahead and test this out. And it says, in fact, the index already exists. We hit that else statement. Now you might wonder, why did I do all these joins? Why didn't I just check the index name? For an index like this, for just a plain old non-clustered index that is not a primary key constraint or anything like that, it's just a non-clustered index, SQL Server does allow you to reuse the same index name on different tables. It does not force this type of index's name to be unique within a database. Now, for primary keys, they're a little different. That primary key name does have to be unique within a database, but for an index name, it doesn't have to be unique. And for that reason, I like to say, okay, not just this index name, but to make sure we're actually doing this correctly, an index name on this table in this exact schema, and be really, really precise about it, because otherwise we could accidentally have duplicate names and then our code could mess up. Now, you might wonder why I had this wording in the problem about do not drop the index or cause it to be automatically dropped when rerun. And that was because the solution that I don't think is as good is to use the with drop existing equals on clause. And this is a very small index, but in the real world, with larger indexes, you don't want to be dropping them and recreating them with the same definition. You might wonder though, like I did, I wondered, hey, maybe drop existing equals on, maybe it's more clever than I thought, and maybe it checks, like, does the index have the same definition? And then maybe it does like a no operation. Well, let's do a little testing and kind of see. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing with fill factor equals 1. Generally never anything you would want to do unless you're just sniffing around in a very safe environment. Because what I'm saying is just put 1%, like fill the pages 1%, leave 99% of the pages empty. Like, so essentially just put fragment my index by default and leave all this empty space in my index. The only reason that I'm doing that is because Northwind is a very small database and I don't want like a 1 or a 3 page index, because what I'm spying on is I'm going to rerun this statement and I'm going to see, is there IO every time it runs? I'm also going to look at the sys.indexes and sys.objects table and see if the modify date on the object changes. Unfortunately, we don't. On the sys.indexes table, we don't get creation date and modification date for the indexes. We just don't have that. It is not tracked when was this index created and when was this modified in the easily accessible dynamic management views. But sys.objects does have a modify date. And the modify date on sys.objects, well, it'll change in a couple of situations. It'll change if you add a column, etc. on the table, if you modify the table. But also, if you create an index, the modify date changes. If you recreate an index, the modify date changes. So we're just going to see if that modify date on the object where we have this index moves. And then we turn things off at the end. So let's go ahead and run this cell. And the first time I do this, I am changing the fill factor. So I would expect that I would have 40, logical reads happening here. So let's rerun this again. Okay, yeah, we are once again getting logical reads happening here. And now let's check out that modify date, the modify date 2825. If I rerun this now, let's scroll down a little. Yep, the modify date has changed. We're doing IO every single time. Now, this is a very simple test. This is not conclusive proof that the entire index is being rewritten every time, but this is enough to say this is not a no operation. And if we think about what it does, essentially what we're doing, if we're creating the index with drop existing equals on, we are rebuilding the index. So even if the definition wasn't changing, we're kind of telling it, hey, redo this index. So that's why I didn't want, yes, using drop existing equals on makes it rerunnable, but it also impacts the table. Therefore, it is a much lighter check to check, does the index exist? If so, do nothing, right? So we were going for the lighter weight check there. All right, problem 2. We have the view statement in this one. We're writing the solution in 2 ways. So the method I like that works on SQL Server 2005 and higher is this pattern of saying the first statement we run, we are going to check if the view exists. And with object ID, now a lot of times what we do is we just pass in the name, but to really use object ID the best way, you want to specify the type of object that you're looking for. You want to be as specific as possible. So I think it is generally best when writing this to specify, hey, I am looking for a view named Idempotent. And if we don't have a view named Idempotent, then I'm going to go ahead and create this. We are using dynamic SQL here for a reason. So let's copy this out, and then I'm going to do a new window here and paste this in. If I just try to do create view like this, right? If I just try to say, I want to create the view here, I have a problem because create view must be the only statement in the batch. If I run this, I will get an error that says your syntax here is not correct. And that is why we have the dynamic SQL. If I have the syntax like this, I haven't, and actually that's, select one as call one. I need to actually provide this. And I am, by the way, I am creating this view in the master database here. So it is important to test that this actually works. And, ideally not in the master database. Maybe let's just go into TempDB to do this test. But this does prove that the code I have in there works. So yeah, it is actually important to make sure that my sample solution works. So we're doing that. We're doing it live. We're doing that on the fly. So now we have code that actually works if that were to run the first time. So let's drop the view idempotent. And to drop the view, I'm going to go ahead and go back into Northwind. We're going to do just drop view dbo.idempotent. And then I did Control E there, which I feel like I keep wishing it would work, but it doesn't work right. So I am in the Northwind database there. DBO, did I spell idempotent properly? Looks like I did spell idempotent properly there. So let's go ahead and run this code, which does complete successfully. And now let's go ahead and drop the view. Okay, the view actually, didn't have it existing. So now it does. I have dropped the view, and now I can make sure this does run successfully when the view doesn't exist. And if I run this again, it does exist. So there we go. But yes, I am required to name my column names in the view. Now, little extra thing here. This is not required for this exercise, but this is just something that I thought about, like just related to the topic. Right here, I'm altering the view. But if I had altered orders, right, I'm using syntax similar to what came in Northwind. It is definitely a bad practice to not specify the schema name. I should have fixed that on both of these. But if I am changing the tables referenced by a view, this is also true for functions. If you change those and you're not changing the view itself, the metadata gets out of whack and you want to refresh it, right? So if I changed the tables and I wasn't changing the views, I would want to run sp refresh view and specify the view name in order to rerun it. So I don't have to do it here because I'm altering the view. It just made me think of that and realize not everyone may have run into that. Because the way I ran into it was by accident when we didn't know that and we screwed up. It was actually a bunch of the functions in our database without realizing it by making schema changes to the objects underneath it. Now, the new way to do this, which, by the way, this doesn't change anything in terms of if you change objects under it, but the new way to do this, which super excited that we got this in 2016 SP1, we got create or alter. So now we have create or alter on, we've got it for views, we've got it for procedures, we've got it for select objects, and it means that we don't have to do that dynamic SQL at all. This is now just totally rerunnable. And if I drop the view and then go back in here, it will work the first time as well. So love that we now have create or alter as an option there. Very, very cool. All right, problem 3, the drop table statement. So first up, let's make sure the tables exist. And then here are the drops that we want to rewrite. So the classic way to do this is to check the object ID. These are user tables. And drop table does not have to be the first statement in a batch. So I don't have to use dynamic SQL in this one. I can just say, if this object ID is not null, I want to drop this table, and then I'm going to drop the other table. So I can run this one. It completes successfully and is rerunnable as well. Now let's recreate the tables so that I can run method 2. The second way to do this is to use the new if exists clause. And I really like this syntax. Notice that I can actually do this in one statement. I don't have to do it in one statement, but I can. I can actually say drop table if exists dbo.dropme1 and then comma dbo.dropme2, and I can drop them all in that one go. Both tables dropped. This also works for temp tables. So love the if exists clause and the way that it can making those statements rerunnable much, much easier. Problem 4, making the set of permission statements rerunnable. Now, I have gone the lazy way in this solution because not all of these statements have a problem. Adding a member to a role is a rerunnable statement, for example, right? So I don't have to do anything to that. Granting select to a role, also a rerunnable statement. So if you wanted to do if things around that and check if it had permissions and do that, you totally can, but you actually don't have to because I didn't put any rules on this one. To make this rerunnable, the commands that we need to fix, if I go ahead and run this cell, the commands that we need to fix are the ones that create new role and the ones that create new user. So if I go ahead and run my solution here, what I've done is I have just used a check with database principal ID, the exact same check, right? Because both the role and the user is a database principal. So I'm saying I want to select the database principal ID for this. And if it is null, I want to create it. Otherwise, I didn't put an else in here. Otherwise, I'm just doing nothing, right? So it's the exact same pattern that I used for the role and the user. And then I just left these other commands the same. So let's go ahead and run this again. I know I already ran it once, but we can see that the commands all complete successfully now. I hope you had fun in this SQL challenge, especially playing around with Jupyter Notebooks if you haven't yet, because I really think there are such cool possibilities for these Jupyter Notebooks in terms of communicating with other folks at work, in terms of learning, in terms of sharing information, because you can save the information that is returned in here. Right? You can clear the results from all these cells, but you also can save them off and share them with others too. So I'm really excited about Azure Data Studio. There's a ton of extensions you can explore which do things with the color themes and add tools in and do all sorts of cool stuff. You can even write extensions on your own. Thanks for joining me today, folks. I'll see you again for another SQL challenge soon. I'm Kendra from SQL Workbooks. Bye now.